Tightness in the lower back is a common complaint. In this video, we're going to go over the research on low back stiffness, and that's going to lead us into some treatment recommendations to help decrease that stiffness. And I know it seems a little odd to go into some of the research on low back stiffness instead of just going straight into some stretches, but trust me, it's going to make a whole lot of sense at the end of the video here, so stay tuned. So this study in 2020 looked at muscle stiffness in those with low back pain compared to those without low back pain. And what they found was that the erector spinae muscles, which are the big muscles on the back, they were 20% stiffer in those with low back pain compared to those without low back pain. And then when looking at the multifidus muscle, which is a deep muscle on the back as well, that was 10% stiffer in those with low back pain compared to those without low back pain. And while none of this is probably shocking to anybody because a lot of people with low back pain will complain of muscle stiffness, what was interesting about this study is that the stiffness didn't actually correlate to physical exam findings. So whether it was bending forward, so forward flexion of the trunk, or if it was manual pressure testing where people push on the spine to feel for stiffness, the stiffness didn't actually correlate with any of those physical exam findings. So the way that we actually assess for stiffness clinically might not actually be that accurate. While this information that those with low back pain experience more muscle stiffness probably seems pretty obvious, it's not actually all that simple, and that's because a 2017 study looked at perceived muscle stiffness compared to actual muscle stiffness in those with low back pain. So what they did was all the participants would rate how stiff they felt their lower back was, and then they tested it in the lab. And what they found was that there was no relationship between those two ratings. So sometimes people would rate that their lower back was really stiff, but their actual stiffness was not very high. And then vice versa, they would rate that their muscle stiffness was low, but their actual muscle stiffness was pretty high. And additionally, what they found was that compared to those without low back pain, there was no difference in actual muscle stiffness in those with low back pain compared to those without low back pain. And so what the study concluded was that the stiffness was actually more of a perception, that those with low back pain perceive more stiffness as a protective mechanism versus an actual muscular stiffness. So what does this mean for actually treating low back pain and low back stiffness? Can't we just prescribe stretches to help with all this stiffness and this would actually just be a 1-minute video and we would have been done by now? Well, sort of, and potentially we should actually focus less on the stiffness aspect and more on the pain aspect. And that's because of this study here, where what they did was they took those without low back pain and injected them with a saline solution, which created low back pain. And what they found when they did this was that it actually increased spinal stiffness because the muscles contracted because of the pain. So instead of actually the stiffness causing the pain, what they found was that the pain was actually causing the stiffness. And this is important because if we get too focused on the stiffness aspect, then we kind of get caught in this cycle where we're doing a bunch of stretching and mobility exercise to help decrease that stiffness, but we're not actually getting any long-term outcomes because the stiffness is actually being caused by the pain, not the other way around. And then when we look at this study, it actually suggests that changes in spinal stiffness might not actually be all that important when looking at improving clinical outcomes anyways. In fact, that study looked at motor control exercises, strengthening and stretching exercises, as well as spinal manipulation and their effects on spinal stiffness. And what the study found was that all of them had similar reductions in spinal stiffness. So on one hand, it's great because we have a lot of treatments available to us that can help decrease low back pain and spinal stiffness. We can do things like strength training, so we can do squats and deadlifts, or we can do some mobility and stretching exercises like cat-camel or child's pose to help stretch out those tissues. Or we can even include some cardio exercises like walking or jogging to help decrease that pain and stiffness. But on the other hand, it's not as simple as if your low back feels stiff, then you should do this stretch. Stretching sometimes does help, and that's great when it does, but typically what we're looking at is an exercise or movement that's actually decreasing the pain and decreasing the threat in that protective stiffness, instead of actually just targeting the stiffness specifically. Which means that overall, our focus should be on finding an exercise or treatment to help decrease the low back pain, because that's probably what's driving this protective stiffness in the lower back. And then secondly, looking for an exercise or treatment to deal with the stiffness. The point here being is that just because somebody feels stiff in their lower back doesn't mean that the only treatment option is stretching. It's great if stretching is helping with that, but we need to be open to other treatments that could potentially actually be more beneficial for both low back pain and stiffness than just stretching. Thank you for watching this video on spinal stiffness. If you made it this far, I hope that this information was helpful for you. If it was, go ahead and smash the like button. If you want to see more of my content, hit the subscribe button as well and the bell icon to be notified of future videos. I'll see you guys in the next video.